Hi everyone, it's Jessica. Welcome back to my channel. Today we're starting week 2 of the 2025 Scrappy Sampler. These are the blocks that we're going to be making this week. This week we have two 6-inch blocks, so let's get started. I have the pieces that we need for both of the blocks this week. The PDF pattern for this week's blocks is below in the description. So we have one relatively easy block and one a little bit more challenging. When we have two challenging blocks, I'll probably split the video up into two parts. But for this one, since one of them is relatively easy, we're going to go ahead and do two blocks in the same video. Okay, so I have my pieces here. We need to make 4 half square triangles. I like to make one at a time half square triangles. I find that they're incredibly accurate, incredibly quick, and they're just my favorite way. And that's why I give instructions on how to make one at a time for these blocks. However, with the same measurements that I give, you can also do 2 at a time. You just wouldn't cut them on the diagonal to yield 2 triangles. You would sew 1/4 inch away from a center line on the squares, and then afterward cut on the center line, and you'll be left with 2 half square triangles that should be the exact same size. So after we make our half square triangles, I'm just finger pressing them open and trimming off the overhang. And now we're going to go ahead and make our block. And the way this block is set up is that the colored portions of the half square triangle are pointing in. We have a colored square in the center, and then we have white or your background squares in the other positions. And we're just going to assemble this like a 9-patch. So I'm going to take that away and I'm going to work on it vertically. I just lay a square on top of the half square triangle and sew across with the 1/4 inch seam allowance. Then I'm going to do the same for the center blue square and a background square. And then I'll repeat that again for another square and a half square triangle. Then I'll cut the thread and we'll add this final column here. So we'll add the half square triangle, the background square, and the final half square triangle. And then cut the thread. And then we're going to have our block almost together. We just have 2 seams left. This is what it looks like. And we need to sew these 2 final seams together. So I don't always know the names for the blocks. Some of them I draw myself. Some of them are older blocks and they're just identified by like numbers in my computer software. But I do know that this one is called a shoe fly, and it's a very common quilting block. And I love making this one. Then we just repeat that on the other side as well. Now both of our blocks this week are 6-inch blocks. So we're working with half the size of a block that we did last week, but we have a mix of 6-inch, 9-inch, and 12-inch blocks in this quilt. And so this is our first 6-inch block. And this is what it looks like when it's finished. Now we can jump right into the next block. And this block isn't specifically extremely difficult. It just has a lot of pieces, and we're going to take our time and work through them. So don't worry about that at all. Now I'm just sorting everything I have here. I have various size triangles. And this is making it look very complicated, but I promise it's not. Okay, so we need to make 1/4 square triangles. I have those. We need to make corner units, which I'm using this. And then this is going to be the center of my block, which I'm just going to set aside. Let's do the corner units first. Now, the way that this corner unit looks is we have a larger triangle, and that is met with a square and 2 smaller triangles. Okay, like this. So the first way to do this is to assemble this. So I'm going to remove this now and we'll work on the smaller portion. And we're just going to chain piece 4 of these because we need 4 corner units. So to do this, it doesn't matter which one you put on first. I just usually start with this one. And we're going to take it so that we're lining up these 2 corners up here. And once those corners are lined up, the rest should fall into place. So just take a minute, make sure your corners are actually lined up. And then we're going to sew across. And I'm just going to repeat that action 4 times because we need 4 of these. Okay, and then after I add that on all 4, we're just going to cut the threads in between and take a look at what we have. My kitty wants attention. Okay. This is what we have so far. Now, what we need to do is sew on the piece that was at the bottom, correct? So that we have this long diagonal here so that we can fit this one attached to it. So to do that, we need to trim this overhang. So I flip it over and just trim it from the back side. And then I have a piece that looks like this. Now to sew this together, I'm just going to turn it, match up the bottom corners. I always start with matching up the bottom corners. I feel like it gives you the most accurately placed piece. Now, because my corners match, my sides are matching, and I'm just going to sew this on. We're going to repeat that for all four. So I'm going to go to the back, cut the bottom one. Then we'll go to the front and finger press this open. Take another small triangle, match up the bottom corners, and then sew. Okay, now when I cut the thread, we have half of our corner units made already. So I'm just going to snip them apart, take the first one, and we'll finger press this open. So now you can see we have a piece that looks just like this, except we have an overhang here. So I just put my finger to make it lay flat and trim that off. Now we're going to sew these two together. I do like to do this with the unpieced one on the bottom. It doesn't always work out that way, but when I can make it work, that's how I do it. I start by matching the corners, and then I just take a second and make sure we're matched all the way around. And then sew this with 1/4 inch. I want to show you this one right away before I go ahead and start chain piecing. Okay, you see how you have this sewing line here and this sewing line here, and they're crossing to make a point. When you sew across in this direction, you want to make sure that your sewing line stays beneath that point. If you don't stay beneath that point, when you open it up, you're going to cut this point off. So it should, if your seams are accurate, it should just happen and you shouldn't have to think about it. If your seams are not accurate, which it's really hard to get accurate seams, when you're going through, you just want to look at it and make sure you're staying below that point, even if you have to just move it over just a little bit. And even though I'm saying to do that, it doesn't always happen to me. And you know what? Like, I'm okay with that. Sometimes I cut off points and it's just how it is. But the ideal that we're striving for is to not cut that off. So that is the way you ensure that you don't have your point cut off. So for our quilt, we need 4 of these. I'm going to go ahead and continue making them. I just want to show you that in the same way when we made the half square triangle, we're cutting off these overhangs here. And now I have a big long piece of thread I must have bumped. But here is what the corner unit looks like. So I have all 4 of those made and we'll set them aside. The next thing we need to do are 1/4 square triangles. We made these last week. They were bigger then since we were working on a 12-inch block, but it's still this same method that we're following. So this time we're using 3 colors. I have 2 triangles cut from my light blue, 1 triangle cut from a medium blue, and then 1 triangle cut from my background, which is going to sit right at the top here. So when I'm making these, I'm paying attention to my color placement and making sure that all of them are going to look like this. Once I lay them out like this and I make sure they're right, I just turn it and then start matching them up. Again, I always start at the corner here and sew down. Now, I normally would just chain piece them all, but we'll just do 1 and then I'll make those other ones. Then you open it up and just finger press. Match up the seams and sew across in this other direction. And just like we did last week, I'm choosing to trim these ones. So when you open this up, this is what you're going to be left with. This is supposed to measure 2.5 inches square. So just like we did last week, we need to find the halfway point, which is 1 1/4. We're going to find the 1 1/4 spot on our roller vertically and horizontally. And where those two meet, we're putting that point on the center of our block. And then we're going to make sure that the diagonal of the block is lined up with the 45-degree line on the ruler. And then you'll trim the overhang. Then you'll rotate your block into the other direction. Repeat the process. So 1 1/4 dot in the center. Make sure that the 45-degree line is lined up with the line of your block. Since you already trimmed this side, this will match and lay out at 2.5 inches on both. And then you'll just trim this overhang and you'll have a perfectly trimmed quarter square triangle. And you're going to repeat that 4 times to make 4 of these. I have my quarter square triangles made and trimmed up. And now we're ready to start assembling this block. So we need 4 of those, the 4 corner units we made, and the center of the block. This block is going to get laid out like a 9-patch too. So let's take a look at the layout. These squares are going to go to the outside corners. And then the quarter square triangles are going to go with the medium blue to the inside. Okay, and then we have our center square. So we're just going to sew it together just like this. I'm going to do it vertically like I always do. And I'm going to start by matching up the quarter square triangle and the half square triangle. Then the next two is the center and another quarter square triangle. And then finally for this column, the quarter square triangle and another corner unit. And then we'll open it up and we'll add these remaining units to each of the rows. And once we finish that, we're so close to being done. So this is what it looks like so far. We just need to finish the last 2 seams. So I just flip one over and match these up and then sew across with 1/4 inch. And then we're going to repeat that on the other side as well. And here is what this block looks like. That wraps it up for today. If you have any questions on this week's blocks, this is block 2 and block 3, just let me know. And if not, I'll see you back here soon. Thanks for following along.